I sent my family $1 for a $2,200 party bill, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. I know how that sounds. Cold, petty even. But before you judge me, let me tell you what it took to get me there. My name is Rebecca Hayes. I'm a marketing director in Seattle. I drive a decent car. I live in a nice apartment, and I have a 7-year-old son named Tyler, who's the only pure thing left in my life. For years, I thought I had it all figured out. Good job, stable income, family nearby. I was the dependable one, the one who always showed up, the one who always paid, until the day I realized that to them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was an ATM with a heartbeat. This story starts with a superhero-themed birthday party and ends with a $1 bill that burned bridges I didn't even know I wanted to cross. In between, there's $18,000, a lot of ignored phone calls, and the kind of family betrayal that makes you question if blood really is thicker than water. Spoiler alert, it's not. I'm about to walk you through the infuriating step of how I went from the family's golden child to the one they now call selfish. How I discovered receipts don't lie, even when the people you love do. And how one little boy waiting by a window changed everything. This is going to be a long story, and honestly, I'll need someone to hear it all the way through. To make sure you catch every twist and turn of how this played out, you might want to follow along with the stories shared here. That way, when the real fireworks start, you won't miss a single spark. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment my world started to crumble. It was a Saturday morning in early March, and Tyler had been bouncing off the walls. His 7th birthday was coming up, and he'd decided he wanted a superhero party. Not just any party, the kind with a real Spider-Man, decorations everywhere, and all his favorite people there to see it. I went all in. I rented out a community center, hired a professional entertainer in a legit Spider-Man costume, ordered a custom 3-tier cake with edible web designs. I spent hours cutting out little superhero masks for the goodie bags, staying up late after Tyler went to bed because I wanted everything to be perfect for him. The budget hit around $450, which honestly didn't even make me blink. My kid deserved to feel special. But more than the decorations or the Tyler cared about the people. He'd made a list in his wobbly 2nd-grade handwriting. His school friends, his soccer teammates, and at the very top underlined 3 times. Grandma Diane, Uncle Brandon, and Aunt Stephanie. He even drew them a special invitation himself, complete with stick figures of all of us holding hands under a rainbow. He was so proud of it that he made me take a picture before we mailed it. The day before the party, I got a call from my mom. "Honey, we're so excited for tomorrow. What time should we be there again?" I felt this warm rush. Haired. They were coming. I gave her all the details again, sent her the address even though she'd been to that community center a dozen times, and went to bed feeling like maybe I'd been worrying over nothing. Then came Saturday morning. I was at the venue 2 hours early, setting up the photo booth backdrop, when my phone buzzed. It was Stephanie. The moment I saw her name, something in my gut tightened, but I pushed it away and answered. "Hey, Becca." Her voice had that overly sweet tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news. "So look, we're not going to be able to make it today. Brandon's got this golf tournament at the club that he totally forgot about, and it's like a really important one for his networking, you know? But we'll totally send Tyler something awesome next week, I promise." I stood there in the middle of the empty room, holding a bundle of balloons, and felt something cold settle in my chest. "Stephanie, this is his birthday party. He's been talking about you guys coming for weeks." I know, and we feel terrible. But you understand, right? It's just one of those things. Tyler will get over it. Kids are resilient. Kids are resilient. As if that made it okay. As if my son's disappointment was just something to shrug off because he was young enough to forget. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her exactly how many times Tyler had asked if they were really definitely coming. Instead, I heard myself say, "What about my mom?" There was a pause. "Oh, Diane's actually with us. She's helping me pick out new curtains for the living room. We're at this amazing home store in Bellevue. You should see the options they have." My own mother, had chosen curtain shopping over her grandson's birthday. I felt my hand tighten around the phone. "Right. Okay. Have fun with the curtains." "You're the best, Becca. Tell Tyler we love him." The line went dead. I stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably just a few minutes, staring at those stupid balloons in my hand. Then I did what I always did. I swallowed it down, painted on a smile, and got back to setting up. The party itself was Tyler's face when Spider-Man walked in was worth every penny. But there was this moment, about 20 minutes in, when I saw him standing by the window near the entrance, holding that hand-drawn invitation he'd made. Just standing there, watching the parking lot. "Tyler, honey, what are you doing?" I asked, kneeling down next to him. "Just waiting for Grandma. She's probably just running late, right, Mom?" The hope in his voice shattered something inside me. I pulled him close and kissed the top of his head. "Yeah, baby. Maybe. But hey, all your friends are here and Spider-Man wants to show you some moves. Come on." He waited by that window 3 more times during the party. Each time, my heart broke a little more. When we got home that night and he asked, "Why didn't Grandma come? Doesn't she love me?" I had to lock myself in the bathroom and cry into a towel so he wouldn't. The next day, I called my mother. I needed to hear her explain it, to tell me there was some emergency I didn't know about, some reason that made sense. She picked up on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. "Oh, Rebecca, how was the party?" "It was fine, Mom. Tyler waited by the window for you for over an hour." "Oh, honey, don't be dramatic. We'll make it up to him. It was just this once. Stephanie really needed my help. And you know how Brandon is about his golf. It's important for his career. Just this once." As if this was the first time. As if I couldn't remember my college graduation where she showed up an hour late because she was helping Brandon move into his new apartment. As if I'd forgotten the time I was in the hospital with appendicitis, and she couldn't visit because Stephanie needed help planning her baby shower, even though Stephanie wasn't even pregnant yet. Just thinking about it. "Mom, he made you a card. He drew your face and everything. That's sweet. Listen, I have to run. Stephanie and I are meeting the contractor about the kitchen renovation. But we love Tyler so much. You know that." She hung up. I sat on my couch, phone still in my hand, realized something that should have been obvious years ago. I was the only one showing up. I was the only one who thought being there. But I told myself it was a one-time thing. They were busy, that's all. Life happens. I was being too sensitive. 3 weeks later, I learned exactly how wrong I was. My phone lit up with a text from Brandon. I almost didn't open it because I was still hurt, still processing Tyler's disappointment. But family was family, right? So I tapped the message. "Hey sis, so Steph's 40th is coming up and we're going big. Reserved the Cascade room for 80 people. Really upscale. You know how she likes it. We're splitting costs between family. Your share comes to $2,200. Can you Venmo by Friday?" Thanks. I read it 3 times. Then I read it again. $2,200. They couldn't show up to a party that cost me less than $500 and meant everything to my son, but they expected me to drop over $2,000 on a party for a woman who called my kid resilient when she ditched his birthday. My hands started shaking. Not from sadness this time, from rage. Pure, white-hot rage that I'd been swallowing for years. And suddenly, I wasn't swallowing it. I opened my banking app and started scrolling. I needed to see something. I needed to know if I was crazy or if this was really as bad as it felt. And what I found made my blood run cold. I sat on my couch that night with my laptop open, Tyler asleep in his room, and went through 2 years of bank statements. I'm talking every single transaction, every transfer, every Venmo payment. I needed to see the pattern I'd been too blind to notice before. The first one I found was from 18 months ago. $500 to Brandon with the note, "House repairs emergency." I remembered that day. He'd called me sounding panicked, saying their water heater had burst and they needed it fixed immediately or the whole basement would flood. I'd sent the money within an hour. Never got paid back, never even got a thank you text. 2 months later, another transfer. $1,000. The note said anniversary trip fund. Stephanie had mentioned wanting to go to Hawaii for their 10th anniversary, and my mom had suggested we all chip in to make it special. I'd been the only one who actually sent money. They went to Maui, posted pictures of sunset dinners and couples massages, tagged the resort that cost $400 a night. Not once did they mention my contribution. I kept scrolling, and my stomach started to hurt. $600 for Brandon's investment opportunity that never materialized. $800 for my mom's dental work that apparently wasn't covered by her insurance, except I later found out she'd used it to buy new patio furniture. $300 here, $400 there, always with some urgent reason why they needed it right away. The biggest one made me physically nauseous. $4,000. I'd sent it 8 months ago when Brandon told me he found an incredible deal on a used BMW, but needed to put down a deposit immediately, or he'd lose it. He'd promised to pay me back within 3 months once his year-end bonus came through. That was 8 months ago. The bonus came new because Stephanie posted about their celebratory dinner at a steakhouse that charged $60 for an appetizer. But my $4,000? Never mentioned again. I added it up 3 times because I couldn't believe the number. $18,400. In less than 2 years, I had given my family over $18,000. And when had they helped me? I opened my message history with my mom and Brandon, searching for the word help. The only results were me offering to help them. I searched for the time last year when I had surgery to remove a cyst and needed someone to watch Tyler for a few days while I recovered. I'd asked Brandon first since he worked from home. He'd said he was slammed with a project deadline. I'd asked my mom next. She'd said Stephanie needed her that week because she was redecorating the guest room and it was very stressful. I ended up paying a neighbor $300 to help out. Nobody from my family even called to check on me after the surgery. My hands were shaking again as I kept digging. I went to social media because something was nagging at me about that party request. If this was such a huge, important 40th birthday bash, surely Stephanie had been posting about it. I opened Instagram and went to her profile. That's when I found the truth that made everything so much worse. This wasn't just about one party. Over the past year alone, Brandon and Stephanie had thrown 3 major parties. There was Stephanie's spring soiree in April, some kind of garden party with a live jazz band and catered food. Brandon's summer bash in July at a rented lakeside venue. And now this 40th birthday extravaganza. I clicked through the photos from the spring soiree. At least 60 people. Professional photographer, ice sculptures. Stephanie had posted a story thanking our amazing family for making this possible. Our amazing family. That meant me. I'd sent $1,500 for that party when Brandon said they were doing something special for Stephanie after she'd had a rough year at work. The summer bash photos were even more elaborate. They'd rented out a full lakeside property, had a DJ, a catered seafood bar, and custom cocktails named after themselves. I'd sent $800 for that one when my mom called saying we were all contributing to make Brandon's 38th birthday memorable since 40 was coming up, and they wanted to practice going big. 3 parties. I'd funded 3 of their parties in 1 year, plus all those random emergencies. While they couldn't be bothered to drive 20 minutes to see my son blow out his birthday candles. But there was something else in those photos that caught my eye. In the background of one picture from the summer bash, I could see Brandon and Stephanie talking to someone near the bar. I zoomed in. The person was showing them something on a tablet. I couldn't make out details, but the body language was clear. This was a business conversation. They were planning something. I went back to Brandon's text about the 40th birthday party. He'd said we were splitting costs between family. That meant it wasn't just me. Who else was getting hit up for money? I called my cousin Rachel, my mom's niece, who I knew Brandon had been in closer contact with. Rachel picked up sounding hesitant when she heard my voice. That was my first clue. We chatted for a minute before I asked her directly if Brandon had mentioned Stephanie's party to her. There was a long pause before she admitted that, yes, he'd asked her for $1,000. She'd told him she couldn't afford it, and apparently he'd gotten cold with her after that, barely responding to her messages. So I wasn't the only target. I was just the only one with deep enough pockets who'd never said no. The ATM that always dispensed cash, no PIN required. And suddenly, I realized something that made my blood run even colder. If Brandon had asked Rachel for $1,000 and asked me for $2,200, that meant he was calculating how much he could squeeze out of each person. He'd done the math on my income, my lifestyle, my inability to say no to family, and decided I was worth more than double what Rachel was. I wasn't a sister to him. I was a resource to be maximized. I sat there in the dark of my living room, the glow of my laptop screen making everything feel surreal, and felt something shift inside my chest. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger. It was clarity. Cold, sharp, crystal clear who these people were and what I meant to them. They'd made their choice when they picked curtain shopping and golf over my son's birthday. They'd made it again when they had 3 elaborate parties while I got a single text asking for more money. They'd been making it for years, and I'd been too desperate for their approval to see it. But I saw it now, and I wasn't going to unsee it. I wasn't going to swallow it down and smile and transfer the money like a good little ATM. Not this time. I pulled up Brandon's text again and stared at that number. $2,200. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as an idea started forming in my mind, probably going to blow up my entire family dynamic. But But as I thought about Tyler's face at that window, about $18,000 gone forever, about being valued only for what I could provide, I realized something important. I didn't care anymore. I was done being the one who always gave while they only took. I was done being, and I was definitely done funding their performance of a perfect life while mine fell apart trying to support them. I opened my banking app and smiled for the first time in 3 weeks. If they wanted my contribution, they were going to get exactly what they deserved. I didn't respond to Brandon's text right away. That was strategic. I wanted him to sit in the assumption that, of course, I'd pay, that I'd come through like I always did. I wanted him comfortable, expectant, already mentally spending my money on whatever overpriced champagne fountain Stephanie had picked out. 3 days, I went about my life normally. I posted on social media about a new marketing campaign I was working on, shared a cute video of Tyler at soccer practice, liked a few of my mom's Facebook posts about her garden. I was the same Rebecca they'd always known, reliable, present. On day 4, my mom called. I knew why before I even answered. Brandon had sent her to do the follow-up, to make sure I was on board with. My mother had always been good at that, playing the mediator, smoothing things over, making sure everyone stayed in line, especially me. She started off casual, asking about Tyler and work, commenting on the weather. Then she slid into it, mentioning how excited everyone was about Stephanie's party, how special it was going to be, how Stephanie deserved something really nice after the year she'd had. I made appropriate sounds of agreement, let her talk, didn't interrupt. Then she said it. The real reason for the call? Had I seen Brandon's message about the contribution? I kept my voice light, almost cheerful. Oh yes, I'd seen it. I'd been meaning to take care of it, just been so busy with a big project at work, but I'd handle it soon, definitely before Friday. Don't worry. I could hear the relief in her voice. She thanked me, told me I was such a good sister, such a good daughter, always so dependable. Those words that used to make me feel valued now felt like chains. But I smiled into the phone and told her it was no problem at all. Family takes care of family, right? After we hung up, I sat there feeling something of power. For the first time in years, I knew something they didn't. I had information they didn't realize I had. I'd done my research, added up my numbers, seen the pattern they thought I was too naive to notice, and they had no idea I was on to them. That afternoon, Stephanie posted on Instagram. It was a photo of fabric swatches and paint samples spread out on their dining room table with a caption about finalizing the theme for her milestone celebration. The hashtags were ridiculous. Blessed, family love, turning 40, gratitude. I commented with a string of heart emojis and a "can't wait to celebrate you." She responded within minutes with 3 exclamation points and a "you're the best, Becca." The best. The best wallet. The best backup plan, the best sucker. 2 days before the party, Brandon texted again. Just checking in on that transfer, need to confirm final numbers with the venue. I responded immediately this time. So sorry, crazy week, I'll take care of it tonight for sure. He sent back a thumbs up emoji. So confident. So sure. That night, I sat down with my laptop and did something I'd been planning since I found all those bank statements. I created a document. A detailed, itemized, dated spreadsheet of every single dollar I'd given them over the past 2 years. Every transfer, every Venmo, every emergency and special occasion. Next to each entry, I added a note, what they'd told me the money was for, and if applicable, what I later discovered it was actually used for. The BMW fund that became a BMW. The water heater emergency that I later learned had been fixed by their home warranty. The anniversary trip I'd solely funded. The 3 parties I'd partially bankrolled without realizing I was part of a family collection scheme. All of it laid out in black and white, undeniable. At the bottom, I added a running total, $18,400. Then I added a final note. Tyler's 7th birthday party attendance, 0 family members. Tyler's 7th birthday party cost, $487. Amount of follow-up calls or gifts sent, 0. I saved the document with a simple title, Family Contributions 2023-2024. Then I opened my banking app. My cursor hovered over the transfer button. I typed in Brandon's information, the same account I'd sent money to dozens of times before. In the amount field, I entered the number slowly, deliberately, watching each digit appear on the screen. 1. Decimal point. 0. 0. $1. Exactly $1. In the note field, I typed, My contribution for the party. Enjoy. My finger hesitated over the confirm button for just a second. This was it. This was the moment I stopped being who they wanted me to be and started being who I needed to be for Tyler, for myself, for every time I'd swallowed my hurt and opened my wallet instead. I hit confirm. The transaction went through with a pleasant little $1 sent. Then I did something that felt even better. I took a screenshot of the transfer. I saved it to a folder on my laptop titled Receipts. And then I turned off my phone. Completely off. Not on silent, not do not disturb. Off. I went into Tyler's room and watched him sleep for a minute, his small chest rising and falling, his Spider-Man pajamas twisted around him from rolling in his dreams. This kid deserved adults who showed up. He deserved a mother who taught him that love wasn't measured in dollar signs and that self-respect wasn't selfish. That night, I slept better than I had in months. I knew what was coming. I knew my phone would be exploding with messages and calls, that there would be anger and accusations, and probably my mother crying about how I was tearing the family apart. But for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I could. The next morning, I kept my phone off all day. I took Tyler to the park. We got ice cream. We played video games. Every few hours, I'd imagine what was happening on the other end. Brandon checking his account, seeing $1. Fusion. The assumption it was a mistake. Then the growing realization, panic, the calls to my mom, the frantic texts that were piling up unread. I let them sit in it. I let them feel what it was like to be let down, to be disappointed, to have plans crumble because someone they counted on didn't come, just like Tyler felt, waiting by that window. On the third day, I finally turned my phone back on. It took a full 2 minutes for all the notifications to load. 47 text messages, 19 missed calls, 3 voicemails. I didn't open any of them right away. Instead, I made myself a cup of coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and smiled. Because Brandon's last text, sent at 11 p.m. the night before, told me everything I needed to know. His carefully constructed party, his perfect celebration, his whole performance of success built on other people's money, it was falling apart. And for once, I wasn't there to catch the pieces. The message was short, desperate, and exactly what I'd been waiting to see. He'd finally shown his cards. He'd revealed what I'd really always been to. Now, I had the perfect weapon to make sure everyone else saw it too. On day 3, I finally opened the messages. I started with the voicemails because I wanted to hear the panic in their voices. I needed that confirmation that what I was feeling wasn't just me being oversensitive like my mother always said. The first voicemail was from his voice was tight, that fake calm when they're furious, but trying to sound reasonable. He said there must have been some mistake with the transfer, that obviously I meant to send $2,200, but accidentally sent $1 instead. He needed me to call him back immediately to fix it, because the venue needed final numbers and payment. The second voicemail was also Brandon, 3 hours later. The fake calm was gone. He was asking where I was, why I wasn't answering. I realized this was important. Stephanie was stressed out. They'd made commitments. People were counting on this party. The third voicemail was my mother. Her voice had that wounded quality she'd perfected over the years, the one that used to make me crumble immediately and apologize for whatever I'd done wrong. She said she was worried about me, that this wasn't like me, that family was supposed to support each other. She said Brandon was very upset and maybe I should just call him and work this out before things got out of hand. I deleted all 3 without responding. Then I opened the text messages. They followed a predictable pattern. The first few from Brandon were confused. Hey, did you see my message about the transfer? The next batch were annoyed. Seriously need you to respond. This is time sensitive. Then came the angry ones. This is really immature, Becca. We had an agreement, but it was the message from Stephanie that told me everything. She'd sent it at 2 a.m, clearly after a few glasses of wine based on the typos. She said she didn't understand why I was being like this, that they'd always been there for me, that she thought I was better than this kind of petty behavior. Then came the line that made my jaw clench. After everything we've done for this is how you repay us. Everything they'd done. I sat with that sentence for a long time, trying to figure out what universe she was living in where she'd done anything. Then I realized she actually believed it. They all did, in their minds, allowing me to be part of their lives, accepting my money, letting me play the role of generous sister and dutiful daughter. That was them doing me a favor. I spent that entire day going through old messages and emails, looking for something I'd missed, some indication that I mattered to them beyond my bank account. I found birthday messages that were generic. Happy birthday, hope it's great, love you. I found thank you texts that never mentioned the actual amounts I'd sent. Thanks so much, you're a lifesaver. I found requests for help that never came with offers to reciprocate, but then I found something else. An email thread from 6 months ago that I'd completely forgotten about. It was between Brandon and my mom, and I was accidentally copied on it. It must have hit reply all without realizing. The subject line was Rebecca's promotion. I'd gotten promoted to director level last year, and it came with a significant raise. I'd mentioned it to the family at a dinner, excited to share good news. Everyone had congratulated me, made a toast, said they were proud, but this email thread started 2 days after that dinner. Brandon had written to my mom saying that my new salary meant I'd have more flexibility to help out with family expenses. My mother had responded agreeing, mentioning that it was good timing because they'd been wanting to do some renovations and maybe plan a family vacation. Brandon replied saying he'd start with smaller requests first, test the waters, see how much I'd be comfortable contributing regularly. I read that email chain 5 times. They'd strategized about me. They'd calculated my worth, planned their approach, discussed how to extract maximum value. This wasn't just taking advantage of my generosity. This was premeditated financial exploitation. And suddenly, every request over the past 6 months made sense. The timing of Brandon's emergencies always came right after I'd posted about work successes or mentioned a bonus. Stephanie's sudden needs always appeared when I'd shared photos from a nice dinner or a weekend trip with Tyler. They'd been watching my life like hawks, waiting for signs of disposable income they could. I felt sick. Not because of the money. I could afford what I'd given them, even if it stung. I felt sick because they'd sat around discussing me like I was a business opportunity. My own family had monetized our relationship. That night, I did something I probably should have done years ago. I called my dad. My parents divorced when I was 12, and my dad had moved to Oregon for work. We talked maybe once a month, and he'd never been close with Brandon since Brandon had sided firmly with Mom during the divorce. But my dad knew them. He'd been married to my mother for 15 years. He'd watched Brandon grow up. When I told him what had been happening, there was a long silence on the other end. Then he said something that made my whole body go cold. He told me this was exactly why he'd left, that my mother had always valued what people could provide over who they were, that she'd done the same thing to him, kept him around as long as he was useful, played the devoted wife as long as he was climbing the corporate ladder and bringing home bigger paychecks. When his career plateaued and he wanted to switch to something more fulfilling but less lucrative, she'd turned ice cold. Started criticizing everything about him, comparing him to more successful husbands of her friends, making him feel like a failure. The divorce happened because he finally realized she didn't love him. She loved what he represented. He said he'd always worried she was raising Brandon the same way, teaching him that relationships were transactions, and he'd hoped I'd be different, that I wouldn't fall into that pattern. But then he'd watched me over the years, always giving, always trying to earn their approval, and he'd recognized the same trap he'd been in. He hadn't said anything because he didn't think I'd believe him. Who wants to hear that their family is using them? But now that I was seeing it myself, he wanted me to understand it wasn't about me. I hadn't done anything wrong. This was who they were. This was who they'd always been. After we hung up, I sat in the dark because I was sad, because I was mourning the family I thought I had, the mother I wished, the brother who should have protected me instead of underneath the grief was something else, something harder and clearer. Anger. Not the hot, explosive, cold, calculated kind, the kind that makes plans. They thought I was being petty sending $1. They thought this was just some momentary rebellion that would blow over once they guilt-tripped me enough. They had no idea what I was actually capable of when I stopped playing nice. I pulled up that spreadsheet I'd created, the one with all my contributions itemized and dated. Then I started a new document. This one was different. This one was a timeline of every time I'd asked them for help and been turned down, every birthday party of Tyler's they'd missed, every time I'd needed them and they'd been too busy, every broken promise, every forgotten commitment, every moment they'd shown me exactly where I ranked in their priorities. I cross-referenced the dates. When they couldn't come to Tyler's school play because Brandon had a work dinner, that was 3 days after I'd sent them $1,200 for their anniversary trip. When my mom couldn't help me after my surgery because she was helping Stephanie redecorate, That was the same month I'd contributed $800 to Brandon's birthday bash. The pattern was devastating. The more I gave, the less they showed up. Because why would they? I'd proven I didn't require reciprocity. I'd trained them to believe they could take everything and give nothing. And I'd just keep coming back with my wallet open and my heart hopeful. Well, that training was over, and the lesson I was about to teach them was going to hurt. But sometimes pain is the only teacher that actually gets through. I opened my email and started typing. The recipient list included my mom, Brandon, Stephanie, and a few other family members who I knew had been part of this collection system over the years. The subject line was simple: family finances, we need to talk. But I didn't hit send. Not yet. Because I'd learned something from watching them. Timing was everything. And the perfect moment to detonate this bomb was coming up very soon. Stephanie's party was in 2 days. They were scrambling, trying to figure out how to cover the shortfall my missing contribution had created. They were stressed, vulnerable, desperate. That was exactly when I wanted them. That was when the truth would hit hardest. I saved the email as a draft and smiled. 2 more days. Then everyone would see exactly what kind of family I'd been supporting all these years. I needed proof, not just for myself, but documentation that would be undeniable when I finally confronted them. Bank statements and text messages were one thing, but I wanted something more. I wanted their own words to condemn them. That's when I remembered something. About 4 months ago, I'd helped Brandon set up a shared family calendar app. The idea was to keep track of everyone's birthdays, family events, important dates. I'd set it up on my phone and tablet, synced it with everyone's accounts, and then basically forgot about it because nobody except me ever actually used it. But here's what I'd forgotten. When I set it up, I'd made myself the admin, which meant I had access to see every event everyone had added, including private ones and any notes they'd attached. I opened the app for the first time in months and started scrolling through Brandon and Stephanie's entries. What I found was a masterclass in manipulation. Brandon had marked my promotion announcement date with a note that said, "Ask about helping with car down payment." 3 weeks before my birthday, Stephanie had added an entry that said, "Becca's birthday. Wait until after to mention kitchen renovation fund." After every major holiday where I typically sent money, there were planning notes about their next request. But the worst one was from right after Tyler's birthday party. The date was marked, but the only note said, "Reschedule, golf tournament more important for Bees networking." They'd known. They'd planned to miss it. It wasn't a last-minute conflict or an honest mistake. They'd made a calculated decision that Brandon's golf game mattered more than my son's birthday, and they'd scheduled it deliberately to have an excuse. I took screenshots of everything. Every callous note, every strategic timeline, every piece of evidence that showed this wasn't just thoughtlessness, it was systematic. Then I did something that surprised even. I reached out to Rachel, my cousin, who Brandon had also hit up for money. We'd always been friendly, but never particularly close. I asked if she wanted to meet for coffee, said I needed to talk about something family-related. She showed up looking nervous, like she thought I was going to ask her for money too. But when I showed her what I'd found, the spreadsheets, the calendar notes, the email where Brandon and my mom discussed strategy, her face went white. She pulled out her own phone and started showing me messages. Brandon had been doing the same thing to her, different amounts, different excuses, but the same pattern. He'd even used some of the exact same emergencies on both of us. That urgent water heater repair. He'd told Rachel the same story 3 months later, gotten $500 from her too. Rachel started crying right there in the coffee shop. She told me she'd been feeling guilty for months, thinking she was a bad cousin for saying no to the party contribution. Her husband had actually gotten angry with her about it, said she was letting family manipulate her. But she defended Brandon, said he wouldn't do that they were just going through a rough patch except they weren't. I showed Rachel the Instagram posts, the vacation photos, the luxury purchases. We cross-referenced dates and realized that every time one of us sent emergency money, Stephanie would post about some new expensive thing within days. New designer purse right after my BMW contribution. High-end espresso machine right after Rachel's water heater payment. We sat there for 3 hours, putting all the pieces together. Rachel had documentation too. Texts, Venmo requests, promises of payback that never materialized. Between the two of us, we'd sent them over $25,000 in less than 2 years. Rachel asked me what I was planning to do. I told her about the $1 transfer, about the email I'd drafted, about my plan to expose everything. She looked at me with this mixture of fear and admiration and said she wanted to help. She said she was tired of being afraid of making them angry. She was tired of prioritizing their feelings over her own financial security. We made a plan. Rachel would forward me all her documentation, and I'd add it to my presentation, because that's what this was becoming, a full presentation of their fraud. We'd show not just what they'd done to me, but the pattern across multiple family members. This wasn't about one rejected party contribution. This was about years of systematic exploitation. Before we left the coffee shop, Rachel told me something else. She'd been at a family gathering about a year ago, one I'd missed because I was on a work trip, and she'd overheard my mother and Brandon talking in the kitchen. My mother had said something about how convenient it was, that I felt so guilty about being successful when Brandon was struggling, that the guilt made me easy to ask. Brandon had laughed, they'd laughed, about manipulating my guilt, about exploiting the fact that I felt bad for having a good career while Brandon bounced between jobs. They'd turned my empathy into a weakness they could leverage. I drove home that night feeling different, lighter somehow, because I wasn't alone anymore. Rachel saw it too. I wasn't crazy or oversensitive or dramatic. I was being used deliberately and calculatedly by people who were supposed to love me. That night, I got an email from Brandon. The subject line was "Serious conversation needed." The tone had shifted from angry to concerned. He wrote that he was worried about me, that this behavior wasn't like me, that maybe I was stressed from work or going through something. He suggested we meet for lunch, just the two of us, to talk through whatever was bothering me. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost funny. Now I was the one with the problem. My totally reasonable response to their exploitation was being framed as a mental health issue, something that needed to be fixed so I could go back to being their ATM. I wrote back a single sentence. "I'm not available to meet, but don't worry, we'll have that serious conversation very soon." The next morning, Stephanie posted on Instagram. It was a photo of her outfit for the party, an expensive designer dress, designer shoes, professional hair, and makeup. The caption talked about celebrating this milestone with her amazing support system, and how grateful she was for her incredible family who always shows up. Shows up. The irony was almost poetic. I commented on the post, "You look beautiful, can't wait to celebrate." 3 heart emojis. Perfect supportive sister-in-law. She responded with, "Love you, Becca. So glad you'll be there." Except I hadn't said I'd be there. I'd just said I couldn't wait to celebrate. She'd made an assumption. They all had. They assumed that despite the $1, despite the ignored messages, I'd still show up at that party with a smile on my face and probably a check in my purse to make things right. They thought the $1 was my tantrum. They thought the real payment would come later, after they'd soothed my feelings and reminded me of my place in the family hierarchy. They had no idea that the $1 was the entire payment, that it was a message, not a mistake. I had one more day before the party, one more day to finalize everything. I spent it going through every document, every screenshot, every piece of evidence one more time. I organized it all into a clear, undeniable timeline. I practiced what I would say, how I would say it, making sure my voice would stay steady even when theirs got loud. And then I did something that felt both terrifying and liberating. I printed everything out. Every bank statement, every text message, every manipulative calendar entry. I put it all in a folder labeled Family Contributions 2023-2024. Physical evidence. The kind you can't delete or claim was taken out of context. That night, Tyler asked why we weren't going to Aunt Stephanie's party. All his cousins would be there. Stephanie had 2 kids from a previous marriage that Tyler occasionally played with at family gatherings. I knelt down and looked at my son. This sweet kid who still believed family meant people who loved. I told him we had something more important, that sometimes grown-ups had to make hard choices about who we spend time with. That family wasn't just about being related, it was about respect and showing up and actually caring. He didn't fully understand, but he nodded and asked if we could go to the arcade instead. So that's what we did. While Brandon and Stephanie's party was happening, while they were explaining to their 80 guests why the venue was smaller than planned and the open bar was now a cash bar, while they were probably telling everyone that I'd flaked on my commitment, I was at an arcade with my son. We played air hockey, we won stuffed animals from the claw machine, we ate overpriced pizza and laughed until our stomachs hurt. And my phone stayed in my purse, on silent, while the messages piled up, because I was exactly where I needed to be, with the person who actually mattered, the person who loved me for who I was. not what I could provide. The reckoning would come tomorrow. Tonight, I was just a mom enjoying time with her kid. Tomorrow, I'd be the woman who burned down their house of cards and didn't look back. The morning after the party, my phone was mercifully quiet. I expected a barrage of angry messages, but there was nothing. The silence was almost eerie. I checked social media and found my answer. Stephanie had posted exactly 3 photos from the party, all carefully angled and filtered to make it look bigger and more glamorous than it probably was. The captions were generic. The comments were polite, but sparse. They were embarrassed. The party hadn't gone as planned, and they were doing damage control, trying to maintain the illusion of perfection, which meant they were vulnerable, exposed, exactly where I needed them. I spent the morning with Tyler, making pancakes and watching cartoons, letting him think everything was normal. Around noon, my phone finally buzzed. It was my mother. Just 3 words. "We need to talk." I texted back. "Yes, we do. I'll come by tomorrow afternoon. 2 o'clock. Make sure Brandon and Stephanie are there too." The response came quickly. "Can't we just handle this privately?" "No. Everyone who needs to hear this will hear it at the same time. 2 o'clock tomorrow. I'll see you then." I didn't wait for a response. I put my phone down and felt my hands shaking slightly, not from fear, from adrenaline. This was really happening. After years of swallowing my feelings, of being the easy one, the dependable one, I was about to flip the entire script. That afternoon, I got a message from Rachel. She'd been contacted by Brandon too, some vague attempt to smooth things over before I arrived. He'd told her that I was going through something, that I'd been stressed, and he hoped she wouldn't take anything I said too seriously. He was already trying to discredit me before I opened my mouth. Rachel asked if I was sure about this, if I was ready for the fallout. I told her I'd never been more sure of anything. She said she wished she could be there to support me, but I told her this was something I needed to do alone. She understood, but she made me promise to call her after what happened. That night, I couldn't sleep, running through different scenarios. My mother crying, the victim, Brandon getting aggressive and trying to turn it around on me, Stephanie acting shocked and innocent, claiming she had no idea. I prepared for every possible manipulation tactic they might use, but more than that, thought about what I wanted to say. It wasn't just about exposing them, it was about reclaiming myself, about drawing a line that should have been drawn, about teaching Tyler, if he was too young to fully understand, that love doesn't come with a price tag and self-respect isn't selfish. I rehearsed my opening line over and over. I needed it to be calm, impossible to misinterpret. No emotion that could be dismissed as hysterical, no anger that could be reframed as me being unreasonable. Just facts. Cold facts. The next morning, I dressed too casual. I wanted to look put together, confident, like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. I dropped Tyler off at a friend's house for a play date. I'd arranged it days ago, knowing I didn't want him anywhere near this confrontation. At 1:30, I put that folder of evidence in my bag. I checked my appearance one more time in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same person who'd sent $18,000 to people who couldn't be bothered to show up for her son's birthday. This woman had a spine made of steel and nothing left to lose. I drove to my mother's house, the same house I'd grown up in, the same living room where we'd had 1,000 family gatherings. How many times had I sat on that couch, laughing and talking, thinking I was part of something real? How many times had I left feeling vaguely unsatisfied, but unable to articulate why? I arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. Brandon's BMW was in the driveway, the one I'd helped him buy. Stephanie's SUV was parked behind it. They were all there, waiting, probably strategizing about how to handle me, how to calm me down, how to get things back to normal. I walked up to the front door and noticed my hand wasn't shaking. I felt calm, centered, ready. I knocked instead of using my key. This wasn't my home anymore. This was enemy territory, and I was walking in armed. My mother opened the door. Face was tight, that expression she wore when she was bracing for something unpleasant. She hugged me, and it felt like hugging a man. All performance, no warmth. She invited me in like I was a guest instead of her daughter. Brandon and Stephanie were sitting on the couch, and the setup was almost funny. They'd positioned themselves together, united front, while a single chair sat across from them. The interrogation chair, the hot seat, where I was supposed to sit and explain myself and apologize for disrupting their plans. I didn't sit down. I stood in the center of the room and pulled out my folder. 4 faces looked at me. My mother, Brandon, Stephanie, and even Stephanie's older teenage daughter from her first marriage, who apparently had been included in this intervention. The daughter looked uncomfortable, like she'd been told to be there for support, but wasn't sure whose side she was supposed to be on. My mother started to speak, probably to take control of the conversation, to frame the narrative before I could. But I held up my hand and said the words I'd been rehearsing all night. Before anyone says anything, I need you to understand something. I didn't come here to be convinced that I was wrong. I came here to tell you that I'm done, and I'm going to explain exactly why. The room went silent. Brandon's jaw tightened. Stephanie's eyes narrowed. My mother's hand fluttered to her chest in that dramatic way she did when she was preparing to play the wounded mother. But none of them spoke, because something in my voice, in my stance, told them this wasn't the same Rebecca they'd always known. This Rebecca had receipts. This Rebecca had evidence. This Rebecca was about to dismantle everything they'd built their comfortable lives on, and there wasn't a single thing they could do to stop it. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document, the bank statement showing $18,400 in transfers over 2 years. I held it up so everyone could see the numbers. This is what family has cost me. This is what I paid for the privilege of being related to you, and I'm about to show you exactly what I got in return. Brandon stood up, his face flushing red. He opened his mouth to protest, but I spoke over him, my voice steady and cold. Sit down, Brandon. You're going to want to be sitting for this. And for the first time in my entire life, my older brother, the golden child, the one who'd always gotten his way, did exactly what I told him. He sat down. He knew. In that moment, he knew that everything was about to change, and there was nothing he could do to stop the avalanche that was coming. I pulled out the next document, then the next, and I began to speak. I started with the calendar app screenshots. I held up my phone and showed them Brandon's note about Tyler's birthday. Reschedule. Golf tournament more important for B's networking. My voice was steady, almost detached, like I was presenting a business report. I told them that Tyler had waited by the window for over an hour, that he was 7 years old and had made them a card with his own hands, that this note, these words, showed exactly where his birthday ranked in their priorities. My mother started to speak, but I held up my hand and told her I wasn't finished. I pulled out the email chain, the one where Brandon and my mom discussed strategizing around my promotion. I read it out loud, every word, the part about testing the waters, the part about timing requests, the part where my own mother agreed that my raise meant more opportunity for them to ask for money. Stephanie's face went pale. Her daughter looked confused, glancing between her mother and Brandon like she was trying to piece together what was happening. Brandon's hands were clenched into fists on his knees. I looked directly at Brandon and told him they'd planned this, that they hadn't just taken advantage of my generosity. They'd strategized about how to extract maximum value from their sister, that I wasn't family to them. I was a revenue stream. I pulled out the spreadsheet next, the one with every transfer itemized. I walked them through it, line by line. The water heater emergency that I later discovered was covered by insurance, the BMW down payment that became a full purchase, the 3 parties I'd partially funded without knowing I was part of a collection scheme. I told them the total out loud, $18,400. Then I said I wanted to show them what I got in return. I pulled out the other timeline, the one showing every time I'd needed help. My surgery when nobody could watch Tyler. My car breaking down when Brandon was too busy. The times I'd asked for simple things, help moving furniture, advice on a work problem, just company when I was lonely, and been turned down because something else was always more important. My voice cracked slightly, but I pushed through. I told them the worst part wasn't even the money, that I could afford what I'd given them, even though it hurt. The worst part was that they made me believe I mattered. They made me think I was part of something real, and the whole time, they were just waiting for the next opportunity to ask for. My mother stood up, tears already forming, her hand pressed to her chest. She tried to tell me I was taking everything out of context, that they loved me, that family helps each other out. I asked her if she wanted to talk about help. I reminded her where she was when I had surgery, helping Stephanie pick out curtains, where she was on Tyler's birthday, helping Stephanie shop for furniture. But whenever I sent money, that was me helping family. When I needed something, that was me being needy. Brandon stood up too, his face red now. He tried to explain how hard things had been for them financially. I actually laughed. I told him not to talk to me about hard times. I rattled off the 3 vacations they'd taken last year, the BMW he drove, the 3 parties they'd thrown that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I told him not to stand there pleading poverty while wearing a watch that cost more than my car payment. Stephanie interjected, her voice defensive. She tried to explain that those things were different, that they were investments in Brandon's career, in their social network. I turned to face her directly and asked if my son's birthday wasn't an investment, if showing up for a 7-year-old kid who loved them, who drew them a picture, who waited by the window until his heart broke, that wasn't worth their time. But I was supposed to invest $2,200 in her birthday. Stephanie's voice shook with, she threw back in my face that I'd sent $1, calling it cruel. I felt my own anger rising now, hot and righteous. I told her she wanted to know what cruel was. That cruel was telling a child you'll be there and then choosing golf instead. That cruel was asking your sister for thousands of dollars after you couldn't be bothered to send her son a birthday card. That cruel was laughing about how easy it was to manipulate someone's guilt. My mother gasped and asked who told me that. I asked if it mattered. Then I asked if it was true. I said they'd literally discussed how guilty I felt about my success and how that made me easy to exploit. The room went silent. Nobody denied it. They couldn't. The evidence was sitting right there in front of them, in black and white. I continued, telling them I'd talked to Rachel. They'd done the same emergencies, same sob stories, different amounts based on what they thought they could get. I reminded them about the water heater emergency they'd told her about 3 months after telling me, how they'd gotten $500 from her too. Brandon's face went from red to white. He hadn't known I'd talked to Rachel. He hadn't known the scope of what I'd discovered. I laid it all out. Between Rachel and me, they'd collected over $25,000 in less than 2 years. I told them I'd gone through Stephanie's social media and found that every time one of us sent emergency money, she posted about some new luxury purchase within days. New purse after the BMW payment, expensive espresso machine after Rachel's water heater contribution. Stephanie stood up and said she didn't have to listen to this, that I was being insane, vindictive because they couldn't make one party. My voice came out cold and hard when I told her to sit down, that I wasn't done. Something in my tone made her sit. All 3 of them were looking at me like they'd never seen me, and they hadn't. They'd only ever seen the version of me that bent over backward to please them. The doormat. The ATM. The reliable. I pulled out the final document, the one I'd been saving. It was a letter, typed and printed, professional and formal. I explained that this was my notification that I was removing myself from all joint family accounts, shared calendars, and group chats, that I was blocking them on payment apps, that I was setting boundaries that should have existed years ago. My mother started to plead, but I told her again that I wasn't finished. I informed them that if any of them contacted my workplace, spread lies about me to other family members, or attempted to use Tyler to manipulate me, I would take legal action, that I documented everything, that I had witnesses, and that I was done being nice about this. I looked at each of them in turn. My mother, whose tears had dried up now that she realized crying wasn't going to work. Brandon, who looked like he was calculating his next move. Stephanie, whose face was twisted with fury that someone had finally called out her performance. I told them they weren't victims, that they weren't the ones who were wronged, that they'd systematically exploited someone who loved them, someone who would have done anything for them because I let them, and that I wasn't letting them anymore. I picked up my folder and my bag. I mentioned that Tyler asks about them sometimes, that he asks why we don't see Grandma anymore, why Uncle Brandon doesn't come around. I told them what I say to him, that family is about showing up, that love isn't just words, it's actions, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who don't value you. I turned toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Brandon. I reminded him about that $2,200 he'd asked for. I told him that $1 I sent wasn't a mistake, that it was exactly what his presence in my son's life was worth, not a penny more. The silence that followed was deafening. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. They were in shock, probably still processing that their reliable ATM had just shut down. I walked out that door with my head high and my hands steady. I got in my car, drove 2 blocks, and then had to pull over because I was shaking so hard. Not from fear or regret, from relief, from the overwhelming sense of freedom that comes from finally standing up for yourself. I called Rachel from the car. She picked up on the first ring, her voice anxious. I told her everything, every word I'd said, every document I'd shown. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she told me she was proud of me, that she was next, that she was cutting them off too. We weren't alone anymore. We weren't the crazy ones, the dramatic ones, the ungrateful ones they'd tried to make us believe we were. We were the ones who finally said enough, and that made all the difference. The first few days after the confrontation were quiet in a way I wasn't used to. My phone didn't buzz constantly with requests or guilt trips. My email inbox wasn't full of forwarded links to things Brandon thought I should buy for him. The family group chat that used to ping at all hours had gone completely silent. At first, the silence felt uncomfortable. I'd spent so many years being enmeshed in their chaos that the absence of it left a weird empty space. I caught myself checking my phone compulsively, almost expecting the flood of messages demanding I apologize, that I come crawling back, that I admit I'd overreacted. But they never came, and slowly, I realized why. They had nothing. No leverage, no angle, no way to manipulate me back into the fold. I'd taken away their power by simply refusing to engage, by setting boundaries and actually enforcing them. The second week, my mother tried a different approach. She sent a card in the mail, a generic thinking of you card with a handwritten note inside. She wrote that she'd been doing a lot of reflecting, that maybe there had been some misunderstandings, that she hoped we could find a way to move forward as a family. She signed it, "Love Mom," with a little heart. I read it twice, looking for an actual apology, looking for acknowledgement of what they'd done, looking for any sign that she understood why I'd walked away. There was nothing, just vague language about misunderstandings and moving forward. No ownership, no accountability, just the expectation that I'd accept her non-apology and go back to funding their lifestyle. I put the card in the folder with all the other documentation and didn't respond. Rachel called me that same week to tell me she'd had her own confrontation with Brandon. She'd sent him a formal letter outlining every dollar she'd given him and demanding repayment. She said his response was to accuse her of being greedy and petty. That family didn't keep score. She'd laughed when she told me that part. Family didn't keep score, but they sure kept track of who they could squeeze money from. She told me something else, too. Her husband, who'd been skeptical about cutting them off at first, had completely changed his tune after seeing all the evidence. He'd actually apologized to Rachel for not believing her sooner, for thinking she was being too harsh. He'd seen their financial records, seen how much they'd sent over the years, and realized his wife had been subsidizing her cousin's luxury lifestyle while they'd been saving aggressively for their own kids' college funds. Rachel and her husband had made a decision. They were done. Completely done, and they were putting that money they'd been sending to Brandon into a vacation fund instead. They were taking their kids to Disney World next summer, something they'd been putting off because they always felt obligated to help family first. Hearing that made something warm bloom in my chest. We were breaking the cycle. We were choosing ourselves, our actual families, the ones we'd built, the ones who actually showed up. Tyler adjusted faster than I expected. He asked about his grandmother and uncle a few times in the first couple weeks, but when I explained that sometimes people aren't good for us, even if they're family, he seemed to understand in that simple, accepting way kids have. He told me that he was glad we didn't have to go to boring adult parties anymore, that he liked when it was just us, or us and his friends, or us and the people who actually wanted to be around him. Out of the mouths of children. My 7-year-old had figured out in a few weeks what it took me decades to learn. About a month after the confrontation, something unexpected happened. I got a message on social media from Stephanie's daughter, the teenager who'd been at that meeting. She apologized for reaching out, said she hoped it was okay. She told me she'd been thinking a lot about what I'd said that day, that she'd started noticing things about her mom and stepdad that she'd never really paid attention to before. She said she'd overheard her mom on the phone with a friend, complaining about how I'd humiliated them, how ungrateful I was, how they'd done so much for me over the years, and she'd found herself thinking, exactly had they done for me? She couldn't think of a single thing, but she could think of plenty of times she'd heard them talk about asking me for money or making sure to mention financial needs when I was around. She told me she was sorry for not speaking up during the confrontation, that she'd been confused and uncomfortable and didn't know whose side to take. Now, she understood. She said watching me stand up for myself had actually inspired her to set some boundaries with her own mom about things that had been bothering her. I sat with that message for a long time before responding. This kid, this teenager caught in the middle of adult dysfunction, had seen something in my actions that resonated. I'd shown her that it was possible to love someone and still refuse to let them treat you poorly. That was worth everything. I wrote back thanking her for reaching out, telling her I understood how hard it must have been to witness all that. I told her she didn't need to take sides, that this was between the adults. But I also told her that she deserved to be treated with respect, too, and that it was okay to ask for that, even from her own mother. She responded with a simple heart emoji, but I felt like maybe just maybe, I'd planted a seed that might save her years of the pain I'd endured. The real shift happened about 2 months out. I'd been so focused on what I'd lost. The family relationships, the familiar dynamics, even the identity I'd held for so long as the dependable one, that I hadn't noticed what I'd gained. I had time. So much time. Time I used to spend managing their crises, worrying about their problems, scrambling to meet their demands. That time was suddenly mine. I used it to sign Tyler up for an art class he'd been wanting to try. I used it to start going to a yoga class on Saturday mornings. I used it to read books I'd been reading for years. I had money. My bank account wasn't being constantly drained by their emergencies and celebrations. For the first time since my promotion, I actually felt financially secure. I opened a college fund for Tyler and set up automatic deposits. I booked a weekend trip for just the two of us to the coast, something I'd always put off because I felt guilty spending money on myself when my family needed help. But more than time or money, I had peace. The constant low-level anxiety that had hummed in the background of my life for years was gone. I didn't wake up dreading what they'd ask for next. I didn't feel guilty every time I bought myself something nice. I didn't second-guess every decision, wondering if they'd approve or judge me. I felt light, like I could finally breathe all the way in. One Saturday afternoon, Tyler and I were at the park. He was playing on the swings, pumping his legs to go higher, his laugh carrying across the playground. I was sitting on a bench, just watching, when my phone buzzed. For a split second, my stomach clenched, that old conditioned response to a notification, wondering what they wanted now. But it was just Rachel, sending me a photo of her. They were on that vacation she'd mentioned, the one she was taking with the money she used to send to. The message with it said, "First family trip in 3 years. The kids are so happy. Thank you for showing me it was okay to choose us." I looked at Tyler on those swings, at the pure joy on his face, and I realized something that made my eyes sting with tears. This was what it was supposed to feel like. This lightness, this freedom, this ability to focus on the mattered without the weight of obligation and guilt crushing down on. I'd spent so many years thinking that being a good daughter and sister meant sacrificing myself. That love reckless giving without expecting anything in return. That family was supposed to be hard, supposed to hurt sometimes. And I was supposed to just accept, but sitting there watching my son play, feeling understood that real love, real family doesn't explode. Real relationships are reciprocal, balanced, built on mutual respect. Everything I thought I'd lost when I walked out of my mother's house, I hadn't lost anything real. I'd lost the illusion, the performance, the one-sided relationships disguised as family bonds. And in letting go of that illusion, I'd made room for something authentic. That night, after Tyler went to bed, I pulled out the folder one last time. All that documentation, all that evidence, all those receipts I'd gathered to prove to them and to myself that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't the problem. I didn't need it anymore. I knew my truth. I'd spoken my truth. Whether they ever acknowledged it or not didn't change what happened. I thought about shredding it all. But something stopped me. Maybe someday Tyler would be older and would have questions about why we didn't see his grandmother or uncle. Maybe Rachel would need backup if they tried to rewrite history. Maybe I'd need the reminder myself on hard days when the old guilt tried to creep back in. So I closed the folder and put it away. Not as a weapon, not as proof, just as a record. Evidence of who I used to be, who they showed me they were, and who I decided to become instead. 3 months after the confrontation, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. When I opened it, I realized it was from Brandon's phone. But the message wasn't from him. It was from Stephanie, using his phone to reach me since I'd blocked her everywhere. She said they were thinking about me, hoped I was well, wondered if maybe enough time had passed that we could all sit down and talk. She said families fight sometimes, but that didn't mean we had to stay apart forever. She said they missed me, that my mother missed me, that maybe we could work things out. I read the message 3 times, looking for an apology I knew wouldn't, looking for acknowledgement of what they'd done, or any sign of growth or understanding. Was nothing, just the expectation that time would magically fix what they'd broken without them having to do any actual work. I thought about all the things I could say, all the ways I could explain one more time why I'd walked away, evidence I could, all the boundaries I could reiterate. But I realized something. I didn't owe them an explanation. I'd already given. Whether they chose to was their problem, not mine. I blocked Brandon's number too. Then I put my phone down and went to check on Ty. He was asleep, curled up with the stuffed Spider-Man he'd gotten at his birthday party. The party they'd missed, the party that had been the beginning of my awakening. I kissed his forehead and whispered into the dark, I'm teaching you something important. I'm teaching you that you're worth showing up for, that your love isn't for sale, that family is who you choose, not just who you're stuck with. He didn't hear me, lost in whatever 7-year-olds dream about. But I heard myself, and I believed it. Finally, completely believed it. That $1 I sent wasn't revenge. It wasn't cruelty. It was a boundary. It was me saying for the first time in my life that I mattered too, that my son mattered more than their party, that self-respect wasn't selfish. And you know what the crazy part is? I'd do it again, without hesitation, without regret, because that $1 bought me something worth infinitely more than $18,000 ever. It bought me my freedom, my peace, my self-respect. It bought me a life where I wasn't constantly depleted, constantly performing, constantly trying to earn love that should have been freely given. Some people might think I'm bitter, that I threw away my family over money. They don't understand. It was never about the money. It was about recognizing my worth, about refusing to be valued only for what I could provide, about teaching my son, through my actions, that he should never settle for relationships that diminish him. Today, I'm building a different kind of family, one based on mutual respect and genuine care. Rachel and I talk regularly, real conversations where we actually support each other instead of just extracting resources. Tyler has friends who's my friends, people who show up, who reciprocate, who value relationships for more than what they can get out of. My life is smaller now in some ways. Fewer people in it, fewer obligations, fewer connections, but it's infinitely richer because every person in my life now is there they choose to be, not because they need something from me. And on the days when I wonder if I made the right choice, when the old guilt tries to creep back, I think about Tyler waiting by that window. I think about $18,000. I think about that email where they laughed about how easy I was to manipulate. And I remember, I didn't lose a family, I escaped one. That's my story. That's how $1 changed everything. Not because of what it represented to them, but because of what it represented. The price of my and let me tell you, it was the best dollar I ever spent. You're listening to this from your own situation. You're not being you're not alone. Setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. What city? I'd love to know this story. And if you want to follow along with more stories like this, stories about finding yourself after losing yourself, hit that subscribe button, because we all deserve to know we're worth more than what we can provide. Thanks for listening. Thanks for witnessing. And thanks for reminding me just by being here that my story and my worth matter.